All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. Today is August 18, 2021. This is the meeting of the Container Storage Interface community. As a reminder, this meeting is public, recorded, and posted on YouTube. Feel free to add to the agenda as we go through the agenda. The link to the agenda document is in the invite. So it looks like, Eric, you've got an item here about immutable snapshot standardization approach. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, so good day, everyone. I'm Eric Qualberg from Infinidat. We've been steadily enhancing our CSI driver. We target large enterprises and kind of global 2000 type companies. And we have heard increasing requests for usage of our immutable snapshot capabilities, which is something which hopefully everyone is familiar with, the general idea of immutable snaps. The kinds of organizations that we talk to don't like deploying vendor-specific approaches, though, so they would ideally like to see something that's more standardized, that allows a supported storage device to expose immutable snapshot mechanisms in a standard way. And I think also on the backup ecosystem, the backup providers, at least the ones that I've chatted with, seem like they would also benefit from such a standardization. So I wanted to just broach the topic. I haven't really engaged in this forum before, and we have not submitted like KEPs or things ourselves yet. We're still ramping up in this space, but would love to understand if there is a path to explore that more broadly as a community.
What is the alternative to an immutable snapshot? What is a non-immutable
So
snapshot?
immutable snaps, yeah, it's just a standard snapshot, I guess. It's an interesting question. The use case is primarily around ransomware recoverability. If you have a storage system that can do a ton of immutable snaps and basically just expire them, after 30 minutes or whatever, the customer could instantly roll back if they detected a ransomware attack. Or if they kept them for longer periods of time, maybe a day or two. Again, it just allows customers to remediate ransomware type scenarios by rolling back instantly. And the immutable part means that you wouldn't have, you can't programmatically change the snapshots after they're set.
Right.
So that's really the key, I think, from a, go ahead.
So I understand the use case, but where I'm getting confused is like the semantics of a snapshot in Kubernetes are already what you're saying, right? When you take a snapshot, like it's given an ID, there's an object in Kubernetes, and like the theory is that like no one can ever change what data that snapshot points to. So that part of it is already there as far as I can tell. But the other half of what you asked is what you said the use case is interesting to me, because you're saying like you'd like to automatically take these every 30 minutes. And I'm wondering, is it not okay to just take a Kubernetes snapshot every 30 minutes and get the semantics you want? Is there a desire to like take the snapshots at a different layer so you can take them more often? Like what is it? I'm not seeing how what we already have doesn't already do what people want.
So I think it sounds like what you want
Today,
is
Kubernetes
snapshot
snapshots
policy,
can be deleted, right? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Xing.
So I think what you're asking, and I remember actually you brought this up, the SIG storage or somewhere in the Slack channel.
Yep.
I think you want a way to specify the snapshot policy, taking periodic snapshots of scheduling and also a retention policy. All of those, you want to be able to specify those through a first class parameter.
So
is that right?
Deletion of the snapshots is a concern, because right, Kubernetes has no way to stop you from deleting the snapshot.
That's
okay.
And that's what I mean when we say immutable. It's not just the contents which are fixed, but it's the fact that you cannot change that snapshot existence within our system for a certain period of time that's specified at the time of provision.
Okay. Oh, you're saying it can only be automatically deleted when it expires. Nobody else can.
Yeah, it sounds like what's being described as an undeletable snapshot.
Okay, yeah, that's a little different.
Self-deleting snapshot with enforced retention or something, which is different than what we already have.
Yeah. And let me be clear as well that I think for the use case, it does make sense to have them occur periodically, but at least from my perspective, that isn't necessarily something that needs to be standardized at the CSI layer. I would assume that many of the customers or the backup software vendors or whatever would schedule that and coordinate that a layer above the CSI activities. But having the ability to specify very clearly what that deletion policy is, if it cannot be deleted until X time period or something like that, that's what I'm asking for at the CSI layer.
One thing that I'm wondering if you do this, it's like, so the storage system will go automatically deleting this, or the CSI driver automatically deleting, but then what about the corresponding Kubernetes object? Who is going to delete that?
Well, maybe these aren't Kubernetes objects.
Okay, so right, that's because otherwise, right, you need a higher level orchestrator.
Yeah, the question is what do you want to manage this on top of Kubernetes or underneath? Because one could imagine a way to like use the existing Kubernetes snapshot API and just like stick finalizers in the snapshots that you don't want to go away to inhibit their deletion, and you could get the effect that's being talked about by driving the snapshots through Kubernetes and preventing the snapshots from being deleted again through Kubernetes. But like that wouldn't take advantage of any special storage controller features. That then you could flip it around and say, well, you could do this entirely underneath CSI in the storage controller and have some policy get set up and the device is taking its own snapshots that Kubernetes doesn't even know about potentially. And then there's just a way to restore those snapshots if you want to, but like until you need to do that, maybe Kubernetes never needs to know about the snapshot. Maybe. I bring this up because our storage controller does this already. Right? We take snapshots from Kubernetes whenever we're asked to, but we're also taking our own snapshots that we don't tell Kubernetes about all the time and automatically expiring those on the schedule. And the only
so that's
problem
another scheduler, like your internal scheduler.
Yeah, I mean the storage device itself just has a snapshot schedule that it takes on the volume, and you can set the schedule yourself and set the retention policy, and you get whatever you get. But the problem comes when you want to use one of those snapshots, Kubernetes doesn't know about them.
Exactly.
And so you have a problem. So maybe what we really need is just a way to import snapshots that were taken outside of the Kubernetes system so that Kubernetes can use them.
We can already do that, right? The pre-provisioned, that's the way to import your using snapshots, isn't it?
Yeah, but you have to know certain complex details, right? Like you have to know what snapshot ID the CSI driver would have assigned to that, or snapshot handle
so you
it would have
asking
assigned.
for automatically importing all of that. I don't know if that's desirable. You could have.
Well, we talked about this way back when we were designing. Like, remember the list snapshots API? There was a long discussion about should we be able to
but
list
we are saying
snapshots?
that we're not supposed to use that. But the only use case for now is actually get snapshot, right? We actually provide a snapshot ID. So I think we actually added some warnings saying you should not be doing that.
Well, we sidestepped this exact use case by we sort of punted and said we're not going to address that today.
Then I don't know why we want to do this automatically. I think it's a concern. There could be a lot of snapshots there. Then
we could in principle have a facility to like make importing existing snapshots easier that relied on something like a list snapshots to go find out what is available.
Then basically need another controller. We don't really need a CS spec change for that, I think, right?
Well, we might need to clarify how list snapshots is supposed to be used, but yeah, you're right. It feels like right? It feels like a need to build another controller on top of CSI to facilitate importing of snapshots that Kubernetes.
But I thought that's not what Eric is asking for. He's asking for.
Yeah, that does just to bring it back to where I was coming from. I agree that to build out that entire use case, it's likely that those other elements would be interesting, but a stepping stone, like starting point, would be some kind of mechanism to set a deletion policy or to reflect a deletion policy that may be set elsewhere for a given snapshot.
But is it the plan?
So not
that
even
all
necessarily
the
the mechanism of deleting it or automatically. I mean, I suppose that the policy could reflect that the system would automatically delete or something like that. But go ahead.
But if this object is not even known by Kubernetes, why do we need this parameter in
Yeah,
Kubernetes. I mean, I'm not confused.
That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is it acceptable to say that all the snapshots must be taken through Kubernetes in order to get this benefit that you're asking for?
I believe so. Yeah,
But
at least
if
for
you're
our design, we encourage, and our customers are telling us that they want to manage all their snapshots. They don't want to have like a separate secret pool of snapshots that's not managed inside Kubernetes if they can avoid it.
But then coming back to my initial question, then who is managing the volume snapshot object? If your storage system expired automatically.
I think that's exactly what Eric is asking for, right? He's saying like he doesn't want all this to magically happen behind the scenes in the storage system. He wants Kubernetes and CSI to be natively aware of storage policy. He wants them to be able to be set at kind of snapshot creation time or some mechanism to say, this is the policy I want for taking snapshots. This is when I want them to expire. And as they get taken, he wants Kubernetes to be aware of them, and he wants those Kubernetes objects to get created automatically. And then as they expire, he wants them to be deleted by Kubernetes on the Kubernetes
So
side.
basically, snapshot controller will have to change to do this.
No,
The snapshot controller will be constantly, huh?
It could be a new controller that layers on top.
So basically need to have a Kubernetes need to have a controller that kind of watches all the snapshots that are going to be expired, something like that.
And we would need to define the API fields where we have, the auto delete Boolean or the deletion time, timestamp that you can fill in at the time you create it that says, I want to create this snapshot now that it expires in 24 hours. And you put that into your snapshot object, and then something 24 hours later wakes up and deletes the snapshot, and nothing can delete it before then.
Like, should Kubernetes be the one that enforces this, or should Kubernetes natively like tickle something on the underlying storage system to say, hey, storage system, when you create this snapshot, it should be effectively immutable until this time?
That's what I'm asking for, actually, Sai.
Okay.
Or rather, I think conceptually, if the storage system has that mechanism in place, because not all do, that functionality should be exposed, because theoretically that would be a higher level of promise, let's say, around the immutability of the underlying data set.
But after that time expires, then what happens? Does it just sit there and you still have to delete it yourself? Or is the expectation that a controller will delete it for you, or that the storage system will delete it for you? Like, what happens after the timer?
I would say the former, at least as a starting point, but I could certainly see a world where someone built a broader controller, or the storage system itself recognizes that this should be deleted at a given time frame. But I think as at least an initial part, awareness of this and being able to set the flag that this is set to expire at X is the main request.
Sorry, I wanted to clarify. What did you mean by the former there?
I think he meant that nothing happens when the timer expires, that it just becomes deletable, but you still have to do that yourself.
It becomes correct, yes. And I also think, by the way, I'm not sure if anyone's on from the backup ecosystem in this dialogue, but I think it would be very interesting to understand the intersection between that and similar policies or mechanisms that the Kubernetes backup vendors may have implemented. I don't know personally.
You should also bring this topic to the data protection group. If you're talking about backup vendors, those are backup vendors attend that meeting. So we're having a meeting.
I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Oh, you don't know? Okay. Then you should. Okay, we have a meeting next Wednesday. Why don't you bring this up there as well?
So I think what's interesting is being able to set that expiration time. Now, there's kind of two ways of going about this, right? One is that we provision a policy, and the other option is kind of taking a step back from that, and when you provision the snapshot, having something in the snapshot, maybe like parameters or something that says this snapshot must expire at a specific time.
I'm thinking you put it in the volume snapshot class as a parameter that says, hold time or undeletable time. And then it just, every snapshot that gets taken with that class parameter gets passed down, something enforces it. where I'm kind of scratching my, oh, go ahead.
So the question there is, would this be an opaque parameter or would this be a kind of first class field?
You could already do it today as an opaque parameter.
My argument would be that it should be, we could do it as an opaque parameter today. Obviously, any vendor could, but I would say that given the increasing importance of this kind of use case that at least we're seeing, it would be interesting to see if we could get community consensus around a first class field to define.
I think that the challenge with the first class field is, what about the drivers that can't implement it? Like, how do you document that it may or may not work depending on your what backend you've got?
Has to be some capability, otherwise.
No, but I mean, just like the end user docs. How does the end user know whether it's going to work or not? Like typically, things that are first class fields always work, no matter what the backend is, because they're implemented in Kubernetes.
First class field, there are also capabilities, right? Like allow voting expansion. That's also a capability. It's not always work. You have to
but the point is Kubernetes is the consumer of that field, not the CSI driver.
Oh, no, for voting expansion, your driver still has to support it.
Right, but the thing that will act on the field is the Kubernetes sidecar. If it's set to false, it just won't do anything.
So same as the voting expansion, right? So you have to have that in the. So it says two ways. Of course, you got a mismatch, then it's still a problem. You're stuck. Yeah, it's just like same as voting expansion. You can set it wrong. You say you allow voting expansion, but your driver may not support it. You get into the same situation, right? So I think it's similar case here.
I don't know. My instinct says that like opaque is probably as good as we can do because there's no way that we can universally support this. And there's nothing, if there's no work for Kubernetes to do, it doesn't feel like there's any reason to make it a first class Kubernetes field. It's just something for the drivers. Well, I guess we could encourage like a common opaque field naming so that as multiple implementations start to do the same thing, we try to name it the same thing. Maybe.
But then how do we encourage that? I mean, we don't really document those type of things, right? You're saying we just document adding something like that, so recommended parameter for this purpose without any coding.
I mean, if there's no work to do for anything other than the underlying driver, I don't know what more we can do.
Yeah.
So I think one interesting way to do this would be, instead of trying to put in the exact expiration time as a opaque or non-opaque field in the storage class, rather create some sort of object to represent storage policy and tuck this inside that policy. So you could imagine like a snapshot policy object. Inside the snapshot policy object, you say, I want immutable snapshots, and you say, what is the kind of expected schedule for expiration of those snapshots?
But Saad, what is the difference between a snapshot class and a snapshot policy? They seem like the same thing to me.
I think what I'm imagining in my head is snapshot policy could potentially be a vendor specific object that's not namespaced. And then from your snapshot class, you can specify a policy as an opaque parameter as a starting point. And so effectively you can get this behavior through kind of like very standardized looking functionality, right? Like you create a snapshot class, in your snapshot class as an opaque parameter. You have a pointer to a snapshot policy object that is unique to, let's say, Infinidat. And inside that snapshot policy object, you are free to kind of customize, do whatever you want. And so as an Infinidat customer, you tell them like, hey, okay, if you want to configure, immutable snapshots, what you do is go into Kubernetes, create a non-namespaced object for an Infinidat object for namespace or for storage policy that says, I want to turn on immutable snapshots. This is the expiration policy. And then in your snapshot class, you tell them to point to that object. And so then
using what? How do you make the pointer? An opaque field?
It would be an opaque field, exactly.
Okay.
And so then when
so it would be the key would be like Infinidat / snapshot policy name, And the value would be the name of the snapshot policy object that you created.
Exactly. And I think the reason that we would be okay with that is because it's not necessarily the concern of the application developer who's creating the snapshot. It's more the concern of the kind of cluster administrator who is creating the snapshot class, because they have to be aware of the opaque parameters anyway. Having them create an additional kind of custom object for Infinidat is not out of line here.
I like the user ergonomics of that, because yeah, it looks much more official and it doesn't violate any rules. So it works really well. The problem it's going to cause is now it forces that particular CSI driver to have to be more than a CSI driver, because it's going to have to reach back out of CSI land into Kubernetes land to pull in the snapshot policy object, because there's no way the sidecar is going to tell you what's in it.
Yep, that is fair.
Yep.
Eric, would that unblock you at the very least?
Well, we're really trying to understand the alternatives here. Not we're not yet at implementation stage in the CSI layer. We already obviously have customers using our immutable snaps. So we would rather wait for some more community consensus to build on the preferred path, but that's certainly a path from my perspective.
Got it. So let me just document the drawback here. Drawback is so storage system could do a custom CR for storage policy and have.
Drawback is that we have to punch across layers in that scenario.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
it's not ideal, but I will say that like having to do this kind of thing comes up over and over again.
Yeah.
So like while it feels gross, it's often inevitable, especially if you want to move fast. So maybe worth trying anyways.
But we can also talk about what we can do kind of at the Kubernetes layer. So it feels a little icky to me to put something like an expiration policy directly in storage class. But maybe that's because, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a separate object, but maybe a field with subfields underneath it for policy. But I feel like this is more than just an expiration date. This is more of like, hey, we want to be able to specify a policy for a snapshot class, or for snapshots created by a snapshot class. And the policy should include a deletion policy and a expiration time at the very least. And then in the future, you could expand it. You could imagine, a snapshot policy that says, I want to create a snapshot at a specific schedule. Like one of the things that Eric was originally asking for, like every 30 minutes, I want the snapshot to be created. So I feel like if we leave storage class as is, and then introduce a new storage class, a snapshot class policy object. And in that policy object, we tackle all of these use cases. One is periodic snapshots, 2 is snapshot expiration, 3 is snapshot deletion policy.
And you're saying maybe this snapshot policy object is not proprietary, it's standardized.
It's standardized, yeah.
If we do all that work.
Right.
I'll just say briefly on like automatic creation of snapshots. Like one of the reasons that we do create them outside of Kubernetes automatically is because of the scaling issue. Like if you're creating snapshots on a schedule very often, and you have a lot of volumes, the object churn that creates gets to be pretty painful. You can quickly end up in the situation where you're creating and deleting thousands of objects every hour, maybe tens of thousands.
Got it.
And so it gets to be pretty painful when you're running your snapshot schedule on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah, I agree that is a concern for us as well, since we are typically dealing with customers who are in the tens of thousands of snapshots and volumes.
So that's why we've opted to do it underneath and keep it hidden, just to avoid the scaling issue. But it does create other issues.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ben.
Long time ago, actually, Gene did a POC with this snapshot policy concept using the meta controller. It was a while back.
Yeah, I think we did have to tackle this concern that Ben has. Like, yeah, if you put a very aggressive automatic creation policy for snapshots, how do we handle that?
And the key thing to observe about these automatically created snapshots is that 99% of them will be created and deleted without anyone ever looking at them, right? Because you only need them when you need them, which is rarely. That's why I personally prefer a scheme where they're created outside of Kubernetes, and then in the moment when you need them, there's a way to pull them in through some sort of an import mechanism, so that for the 99% you never cared about, you never see them, and for the 1% you do care about, there's a way to get them pulled in so you can do something with them.
That's an interesting idea, and maybe we make that configurable potentially. Like or maybe not. Maybe that's exposing too many knobs. But yeah, I like that.
I mean, it's a hard problem because, like, the storage system knows the snapshots are there, and you could wire up the CSI plugin so that list snapshots could tell Kubernetes, could tell a sidecar that they're there. But then how do you go from there to actually creating the Kubernetes object that represents them so that you can turn around and perform a clone?
Yeah. I mean, what we could do is tackle this in pieces. So I think we've highlighted at least 3 things that we want to be as part of storage policy. It sounds like automatic creation of snapshots is probably going to be the hardest, not just because of the scaling issue that Ben mentioned, but also because of the timing issue and like, oh, what happens if we don't create it exactly this time? Who manages the time? All that kind of stuff. Snapshot deletion policy may be the simplest. Snapshot expiration time also seems fairly straightforward. But I think, yeah, maybe we handle those 2 first, create this kind of snapshot policy object as an alpha, and then start talking about the harder use cases. I mean, we can kind of talk through maybe snapshot expiration time and what that might look like. What I'm curious about is, would it be anything more than a Boolean to the backend to say, hey, this snapshot's created with this policy must have an expiration date? Or
you need a time interval like 24 hours or 1 week or 1 month or something. And then you would just add that to the current time, and that would become the expiration timestamp.
All right.
The strange thing that occurs to me is that if we did that, there's nothing to stop someone from just implementing that in their CSI plugin just by refusing to process deletion requests if the timestamps don't line up.
Yeah.
You don't need it to go all the way back to the storage system in that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Although, of course, it doesn't provide the same kind of guarantee, again, and then if we assume there's a bad actor in place that has access to the underlying data set.
So maybe we could make this basically, supported at the Kubernetes layer such that if an underlying storage system doesn't support it, at least Kubernetes will enforce it. And if the underlying storage system also supports it, then you get that double level of kind of protection.
Oh yeah, you're right. You could hoist it up into the sidecar, so the sidecar would refuse to process the deletion request
Right.
if it was marked as one that shouldn't be deletable yet. And then the CSI drivers wouldn't have to do anything if they didn't support it, and they would still get some of the benefit. And if they did support it, then they could give you that extra layer of protection so that even someone with direct access to the storage still can't delete it.
Right.
For the truly paranoid. And we should all be truly paranoid, just to be clear.
Right. I guess the question then is like, if an underlying storage system doesn't support it, do we want to let the user know somehow because, it's not as protected as it should be? It seems like probably yes.
I would say definitely yes, because at the end of the day, if you had a bad actor, it's really not any protection if Kubernetes is the only way to enforce it.
Right.
I mean, it's something, but it's not anywhere near the back-end storage implementation. I don't know if we have any security specialists on this call.
I was just going to say nothing
it
stops the plugin from lying. So, and you would never know until you looked at the implementation that they were lying.
I think the plugins have so much privileged access that if they're lying, we got bigger problems.
You got bigger problems.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So at a very rough kind of 30,000 foot view, we're talking about a snapshot policy object. In my head, it is non-namespaced. Initially, it has a time frame that specifies how long you want a snapshot to be immutable for. You can be 30 minutes, it could be 24 hours. If it is specified and a storage class points to it, then Kubernetes would step in to start enforcing it. And it would also reach out to the storage system to say, hey, storage system, when this volume is provisioned, use this policy. Specifically, don't delete this snapshot for whatever amount of time. And then when the storage system takes the snapshot, it internally knows, oh, okay, for 24 hours, I'm not going to allow this to be deleted. I guess that implies a change at the CSI level. We could put that on the create snapshot object. Yeah, I think this seems feasible to me. I don't see anything like, at least for this very simple use case of like expiring snapshots. I think that's a good place to start. It doesn't seem like there are any major blockers here. I think the next step would be to see if we can find an owner to help drive this. Maybe create a Kubernetes KEP, and then we can get a PR on the CSI side and get some PRs on the Kubernetes side to start driving it towards some sort of alpha. Does that sound okay to folks?
Yeah.
Seems reasonable to me.
Cool. So time frame wise, we just started the 123 cycle on Kubernetes. And so if we want to get it in this quarter effectively, or actually it's a little bit past the end of September, the next release, we need to get this officially, get a KEP going very quickly. More realistically, we would just create a KEP this cycle and then have it for the 124 cycle. But I think the most important thing is to find an owner. Eric, are you interested in driving this, or do you know somebody who might be interested in driving it?
I'm interested in understanding the process required, at least. Yeah, if not driving it myself, then we can explore other folks on my team.
Sounds good. Okay, I think best thing would be to attend the Kubernetes storage SIG meetings, which happen every 2 weeks. The next one will be next week, Thursday. You can find the invites on the Kubernetes storage SIG calendar. And
yep, I have that one on my calendar, actually,
okay,
and
perfect.
attend periodically.
So feel free to throw something on the agenda to say like, hey, I want to talk about this, and see if like if you find somebody that wants to drive it, something like that, feel free to throw it on the agenda and we can take it from there.
I think it's good
Great.
to
And the
also
other interlock
attend
that
it.
I wanted to understand from a process standpoint is, does it make sense to discuss this at a high level with the data protection SIG that I just learned exists before filing the KEP, or is it more common in your process to interlock after there's a KEP for everyone to stare at?
You can attend. I think you should actually attend the data protection working group, which is just one day before the SIG storage meeting. So the data protection working group meeting is on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think generally we try to operate independently as much as possible, and then collaborate wherever necessary. So especially when the data protection work group decides like, oh, actually we want to work on this specific thing, then they try to bring it back and kind of get it reviewed by core SIG storage. But just the discussions can happen completely independently, no need to block.
Okay, but KEP first then, or rather discussion and KEP are independent then.
Yep.
Okay, great.
All right, good topic, Eric. Any other topics of discussion for today? All right, I guess we can end a little bit early today and give folks time back in their day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you all.